Afghanistan has always been a land at the crossroads of history. Its rugged mountains and hidden valleys have been fought over for centuries by a succession of foreign powers keen to control this vital gateway to Central Asia. 1,000 years ago, it was at the heart of the Silk Route, a prosperous and cosmopolitan place where caravans brought trade along a road which linked Europe to China. As the task of rebuilding this shattered nation begins, it's a good time to ask, what kind of society flourished here before it was plunged into war 22 years ago? Film footage from the 1970s paints a very different picture of Afghanistan to the one we've become accustomed to. It was a time when Kabul was famed as an exotic stop-off point on the Hippy trail between Europe and India.
That was the golden period of the Afghan, because at that 10 years, I think everything was flourishing.
Professor Ahmad Javid was Chancellor of Kabul University at the time.
Afghanistan was, from the tourist point of view, a kind of paradise. You could come across different cultures of different ages. There was a chance to see a life or a culture which just resembled 2,000 years back, and also you could come across a very, very modern society, a modern family life, which looked like Europeans. Cheap hotels, where everybody used to turn his house as a hotel, and mostly they were full of the young ones who they come to across the world. Most the hippies, they felt very, very free in that country, because they could come across of the hashish, and the hashish to sell, it was not forbidden. I'm sure you will not come across of any Afghan at that age to have asked asylum at any country in the world. It means to them to be an asylum seeker, it was a shame.
Since the 1980s, literally millions of Afghans have fled their homeland. There are 40,000 living in London alone. Farah Hawad is one of them. She's a journalist who left Kabul in 1994 and has been living in Britain ever since.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.
Afghanistan was the first Asian country that had a women in parliament, minister, and senator. So women were progressing, going on to the higher education and working outside their houses. I think that was the best time for women.
Tolerance has been a hallmark for much of Afghan history. The great Buddha statues at Bamiyan, the largest in the world until the Taliban blew them up, reflected the 1,000-year period when Afghanistan was a Buddhist country. For centuries, different religious and ethnic groups had lived side by side in relative harmony. In the 1970s, that was still so, but new pressures from the outside world were beginning to divide and darken the landscape. Even during this so-called golden era, there remained a serious divide between rich and poor, while ethnic divisions lingered beneath the surface.
Of course, there were tensions. There were legitimate criticisms of the government as it was at the time. because it was very authoritarian. But the social atmosphere was very open and friendly.
King Zahid Shah, seen here with President John F. Kennedy in the United States, would soon find himself drawn into the Cold War struggle between the US and communism. A new great game was underway. But beyond the pomp and ceremony, the king's reforms did not go far enough for many villagers still living in poverty.
There was a great deal of support for the reforms that Zahir Shah had initiated in the 1960s, but by the end of the decade, these seem to have sort of ground to a halt or lost their original impetus.
Some Afghans believe that it was the king's failure to speed up reform which led to some sympathy for the Afghan Communist Party long before the Soviet invasion. The charge d'affaires at the Afghan embassy in London, who is brother of assassinated Commander Ahmad Shah Massoud, believes the king had lost touch with his people.
Because king was taught as the shadow of the god, and people had to obey the king. And people were socially, they were so down that even if they wanted to claim their rights, social justice or political rights, they could not claim it. They first thought that was a rebellious against the king and against the shadow of the god. There was some sort of caste system in Afghanistan. What I mean by caste system, that many other people, they were deprived of their rights, as I said, social right, economic right, political right, other rights. They were deprived of.
It would be fertile ground for the Soviets, who for much of the 1970s provided aid and infrastructure while quietly infiltrating Afghan society.
Even in the time of king, there was this what they call Communist Party, which was called the Percham, and then the Khalq. They were there, but they didn't say that they were real communists.
As communist armies began sweeping into power in Vietnam and elsewhere in Asia, so too was Afghanistan being drawn ever deeper into the Cold War of the late 1970s.
Democratic land and water reforms are carried out with the participation of broad masses of the peasants. More than 350,000 peasant families have received over 689,000 hectares of land during the post-revolutionary years.
And also they had never spoke about their idea about communism or something like that. But when the invasion took place, so everything changed.
When the communist revolution took hold in 1978, followed by the Soviet invasion a year later, it would polarize society and create a social revolution of sorts.
They claimed that women had equal rights and they should be given an opportunity to demonstrate their real potential. Nevertheless, the fall of the women began when Soviet invaded Afghanistan.
But despite the savage and inhumane crime being committed by the enemies, the people are heroically taking part in the renovation of their homeland and defend their revolutionary achievements.
They use women as their revolutionary tools for their propaganda. And also the opposition used women for their propaganda. So women become a victim of the government and also the opposition.
It is a matter of historical record that the CIA and other Western powers supported the Mujahideen resistance to the Soviet occupation. The US-backed 10-year war would claim more than 1 million lives. By the end of the 1980s, the Soviet occupation, like so many invaders before them, had become untenable. The Soviet army withdrew in 1989, leaving a client government in place under President Najibullah. He would not last long. Hung in the streets by victorious Mujahideen in 1992 as they descended on Kabul, sweeping away the last vestiges of the Russian-backed government. But like the traditional Afghan sport of dogfighting, the various Mujahideen fighters then set upon each other, this time according to ethnic divisions: Tajik, Uzbek, Hazara and Pashtun. Then, in 1994, the Pashtun-dominated Taliban came to power, establishing what they called the purest Islamic state on earth. There has even been accusations that the US helped create and support the Taliban from the very beginning.
The unicall of the American, they wanted to have gas and oil from Central Asian republics to go through Afghanistan to Pakistan. This was their aim, and that's why they participated enormously in creating and promoting the Taliban.
In Afghanistan, women has no right. So I say, you took this right from us. And again, you're killing us. We blamed first the Soviet Union, the communist regime, and of course, America. We blame America. They put us in hell.
Centuries of foreign interference have made the Afghans suspicious of foreign intentions. Like the Bush Khasi horsemen, who play their version of polo with a dead sheep or even the severed heads of their enemy instead of a hockey ball. The Afghans are not squeamish when it comes to battling their opponents. They have been forged as a people by defending a land that many have tried to conquer since the time of Alexander the Great. All have failed. Today, Afghanistan is once again the battleground for the great powers, and the Afghans remain uncertain hosts.
There isn't a race of Afghans. There is a nation of Afghans only when Afghanistan is under attack from outsiders. And when this happens, there is a closing of ranks and a tendency towards extremism. I think that the most that outsiders might do is to facilitate. What they shouldn't do is meddle.
Nobody is suggesting that Afghanistan returns to the society it once was, but there are clues there and warnings for the international community seeking a return to a tolerant, broad-based society. Uniting the Afghan people again, without imposing a solution, will be a great challenge. After decades of war, poverty and religious fundamentalism, Afghans are hopeful that a new era of peace might begin in this ancient and troubled land.